Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
What a lovely thing to look out and see this sea of orange out here. Wow, that's really awesome. Thank you for getting your orange shirts on this morning and coming out to join us. And I think these shirts promote a togetherness, a feeling of togetherness, that we're all kind of in the same boat here. And so we have an opportunity today to learn about reclaiming the lost culture of the Indigenous folks. And so this is part of it, being together and learning together. We have a few announcements, and we've got, Rick, did you want to go first?
So, I'm not here about finances, so everybody can relax. I'm also on the search preparation committee, and I just want to give you an update as to where we are in this process. The committee was struck to basically get the documents ready for our search, and I can report that the 4 documents are now ready to go. We have the living faith story, which you would have received and reviewed, and I got plenty of feedback on that. Mostly spelling mistakes, but... And then the other 3 were the financial viability report, the demographics report, and the real property report, which are just facts and figures, so they don't really need to be reviewed. So the next step in the process is our M&P committee and other people are working on job descriptions for the permanent minister and for a supply minister if we decide we need one. So after that, the next board meeting is on October 3rd. So the board will approve these documents. Okay, and then the next step after that is a congregational meeting, which we're targeting to be on October 15th, where the congregation will approve the documents. Then they go to Antler River, and Antler River has to approve the documents. And then once that is done, the documents will be put up on a website called Church Hub, which it can be viewed by basically church administrators and all United Church ministers. And a little switch will be flicked to say that we are looking for a minister, searching for a minister, and then all the ministers out there will be able to see our church and that we're looking for a new minister, and we will be able to see all the ministers that are looking for a church. Okay, and then we, contact ministers, or ministers can contact us, and the other thing we need is a search committee, which we're also in the process of putting together, and that committee will have to be approved by the congregation, I believe, as well, and then we start the search. So right now it looks like we're going to start the search probably in November, and we'll see how it goes. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Are there any other announcements from the floor? Okay, well, I have a big long list of announcements, so let me get going on this. The bulk of our service today will be our speaker, Joanna, and her mom, Marlene. They are going to bring us a lovely story today, so that will be the bulk of our service. So you'll find a few of the regular things in our service missing today. So that's why that is. We'll have a very short beginning with the children, of which there are none at the moment. So we'll have a very short children's time. And after Joanna's finished, we will have a closing prayer and our usual ending song. Food bank is not going to happen in the usual manner today, but food contributions can come in any time, and so I would encourage you to come next week with your food things. Today, if you're able to stay a little bit longer for a social time, we can indulge in an extra cup of coffee, a second cup of coffee, and some snacks in the kitchen area. So it's also a time to connect and socialize a little bit. So please do that if you have time. The offering plate this morning will not be brought forward, but it is available out in the hall just outside the doors there. So you're welcome to access the offering plate there. And pardon my voice, of course, the one day when I need a voice, I hardly have one. Next Sunday, we are excited to have Charlotte. Charlotte Toyne is her name, and she is going to be leading us in worship. Charlotte is a young priest in training in the Anglican Diocese of Huron, and Charlotte is from the Sarnia area. She has been studying her master's in divinity at Queen's College in Newfoundland, and we are honored to be one of her first congregational services in her faith journey. So please come out next week and meet Charlotte. So again, welcome to all, whether you have an orange shirt or no matter what color your shirt is today. We're glad to see you here, regardless of your size, your shape, your age, your gender orientation, or ethnicity, whether you came from far away or nearby. We're glad to have you here today, all gathered as one. Kamloops United Church is located on the beautiful homeland and traditional territory of the Chippewa, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Delaware First Nations. We give thanks for the welcome these nations have extended to us through their treaties, ancestral traditions, and languages. We look forward to working together in the mutual sharing and stewardship of this good land. Our first hymn this morning is Come In and Sit Down, which you're already doing, so that's great. We do have some rhythm instruments if anybody would like to use them. There are no children here today, so I will just proceed as if there were some children here. And we were and we are going to talk about our new shirt designs today. This is a brand new design created and pressed on for us by Amy Fournier. She's from Kettle Point, and she has a little home business. So she does shirts and flags and so on. And we were lucky to get her to design and prepare these shirts for us. I'm going to talk about the design of the design of the shirt. So from a distance, it looks like a heart. So you can see that. On one side, there is a baby, a child, and that child is in a cradle board called a tikanagan. And these children were carried in their cradle boards on the backs of parents when the parents were doing work and so on. That was a closeness and a feeling of love and security for the child. So that's on one side. On the other side, it is a footprint, and this it is making us think of the path that a child or anyone takes, the path that a child would follow, and the traditions of our Indigenous ancestors. And with these joined together, of course, it forms a heart, which reminds us of love. So that's the background on the shirts. The children in Kids Zone have been painting and painting and painting and painting. They've painted lots of orange rocks. And they've put some beautiful sparkles. There's Nikki. Nikki, I'm sorry, you're going to be vacuuming sparkles for months to come. And our plan was to put all of these rocks around the heart here and make our heart. I think maybe the kids will enjoy doing that next week, so we'll think about that for next week. We've got a few things here, we've got a few things there, and a few things outside as well. If you didn't have a chance to notice there, take a look at those things from today. I also was going to talk to the children about how you get to know new people. And one way to get to know new people is to actually talk to them, to actually make eye contact and go up to them and speak with them and even smile at them. Sometimes we shy away from new people of a different ethnicity or people visiting that we've never seen before. So we want to get to know new people by talking to them, and if we know any words in their language. I was going to talk to the children about 2 words in Ojibwe, 2 words that I learned early on. One of them is buju. Buju is hello. Hello. So buju, everyone. Buju. And another one is the word miigwech. And miigwech. Miigwech means thank you. Thank you for whatever you have just done. It's not just a thank you, but it's a you've done something for me and I am grateful and I'm expressing my thanks to you. That's what's all wrapped up inside that word. So I will challenge you to speak to people of different ethnicities or strangers that you might meet and come upon, and at least smile to them and say hello. And that would be a good way to make a friend. Today I want to introduce our speakers. Our speakers are both beautiful, lovely ladies from Kettle Point, and they're both my friends. I've known them both for a long time. Marlene is an elder at Kettle Point, and she herself a survivor of residential school. Marlene, which residential school did you go to? Was it?
Mohawk Institute in Brantford.
Mohawk?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Brantford, Ontario.
In Brantford, yes. Okay, thank you.
The Mohawk Institute. Nice.
Do you want to speak a few words right now, Marlene? Or later?
Are you ready for me?
We sure are.
Okay, I will introduce myself. Hello, everyone.
Bonjour.
My name is Marlene Cloud. I am 84 years old. I am a survivor of the residential school. I went to Brantford for 6 years. And it was horrible. I was a victim of every kind of abuse you could think of. And I'm going to ask Joanna to tell my story because being this old, I can't speak my words very clear anymore. Thank you for coming.
Miigwech, Marlene. Now let me just introduce Joanna. Joanna Cloud also is a Kettle Point person, and I had her kids in kindergarten when I first started teaching at Kettle Point. So Joanna is a mom, a grandmom, and she has just started a new career. For the last 2 or 3 years, she's been studying to become a teacher, and she just has her first job this year at Kettle Point in the elementary school there. Joanna and Marlene both went to the Vatican with other representatives to meet the Pope. And so their story today is going to wrap around their trip to the Vatican and also some of the history of residential schools and what we can learn and appreciate from that. So, Joanna.
Miigwech, Ruthann. Miigwech, everyone, for showing your support and wearing the orange shirts. That was a surprise, and it was very nice. I would just like to say, Minot Gajeb, good morning. Ani Buju, Joanna Cloud, and Dishnikos. That's hi, hello, that's my name, Joanna Cloud. Kiko Nong and Don Jaba, it means I make my sound from Kettle Point. And Mishike and Doda, my clan is the Turtle Clan. And that's our traditional greeting. And every time we get to say our traditional greeting, it's an act of decolonization because that was taken away from us in residential schools. So now we encourage our children to always use that as their traditional greeting. I'm very grateful that my mom is here, and I have a few words that I want to say on her behalf. There's just so much to share, like it could take a really long time. But this is, on this first page is a mosaic that I made and I gifted to Hillside School, and that's our Bring Our Children Home logo. So I did that to honor my mom, and I gave it to Hillside School. If we go to the next slide, this was the first delegation that went to the Vatican. They were all survivors from different provinces in Canada. There was Chief Roseanne Casimir, Adeline Weber, Chief Gerald Antone, John Bacale, Dr. Welton Littlechild, Chief Marie Ann Daywalker Pelche, and actually this past fall, Chief Daywalker Pelche just had her, she was on Canadian Stamp. She had her picture placed on the new stamp series. Phil Fontaine. Phil was a former Assembly of First Nations chief. Rosalie Labillos, Phyllis Gugu, Marlene Thomas. We also had 2 young youth representatives, Taylor Ben, and we had another young girl, Rosalie. So we also wanted to have youth present because going forward, they're gonna be our leaders. They're gonna be the ones who are gonna carry on this message. So we had to have youth as part of the delegation. We also had Fred Kelly, he was our spiritual support worker. And we also had Michelle Shenandoah. She was a spiritual support worker too, because it was really important for our elders to have emotional support while we were there, because we didn't want to re-traumatize anyone anymore. Can we go to the next screen? And this is just, we'll just look at it quickly. That's just the list of the names of the First Nations delegates. And if we go to the next screen, this was the secondary delegation. And the secondary delegation was people like myself and my sister. We were there to help my mom. We were there because our elders needed help with their physical needs, their emotional supports, and everybody was able to have someone to help them. We also had the Assembly of First Nations Chief of Staff and the Assembly of First Nations Chief of Communications. And this didn't look like a lot of people, but there was actually a lot more people in the background. We had photographers, we had videographers, there were people from from APTN, from CTV News. So altogether, the whole delegation that went over to Europe was probably around 150 people. We arranged different flights on different days, so it was really busy. If we go to the next slide, we also had a delegation from the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. So we had bishops and we had the archbishops travel with us. We also had Tom Deerhouse. He was the mental health worker from the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, so he was there also to provide support. Neil McCarthy was there for the communications piece. Neil doesn't normally work for the Conference of Catholic Bishops. He normally works with the and it went right out of my mind. He normally works for another branch of the Catholic Church. And I should have wrote it down. But he was with us because he's traveled to Europe several times. He goes there whenever when there's a process for the new Pope. Oh, I'm sorry, he works for the Cardinal's office. That's it. He's the assistant to the Cardinal in Canada, and actually the Cardinal was in the running to become the Pope, but he wasn't chosen. So Neil works very closely with the Cardinal, so he goes to Europe several times. He goes to the Vatican, so he was very familiar with all the processes, so we really needed his help. And Tracy Blaine was the liaison. Our next slide is, these were the groups. There were 3 separate delegations that met with the Pope. There was a First Nations delegation, which we were part of. There was an Inuit delegation, and there was a Métis delegation. It's the government that makes these distinctions. We all consider ourselves First Nations people of Turtle Island. We never made those distinctions. It was the government that made them. So we all, and the children, they were all treated the same way, whether they were First Nations, Métis or Inuit, they were all mistreated in the same way. So we greeted and supported each other as family while we were there. Okay, the next slide. On Tuesday, March 29th, we had a tour of the Vatican Museum, the Vatican Gardens, and St. Peter's. We also had a tour of the museum, and they had a really nice luncheon there for us. They were trying very hard to be accommodating and welcoming. but seeing so many of our traditional items on display, it was very difficult, not just for the survivors, but also for us, because they were sacred items, and we have protocols that we do particular processes for sacred items. So seeing our sacred items on display, it was very disturbing. There's a picture here of an original wampum belt that was several hundred years old, and it was very hard to see them on display. And I don't think the Vatican said that these items were gifted to them, but we really feel that they need to be returned to the first people so that they can be honored and cared for. And I just don't think they understood how we felt the need to have these items returned to their homelands and be taken care of by the original peoples. The next slide. They also, later that evening, we had a reception at the Canadian Embassy to the Holy See. Many of you probably know that Vatican City is like considered its own country. So because it's like its own country, it has ambassadors from other countries. So there is a Canadian ambassador assigned to the Vatican City, and his name is Paul Gibbard. And he's actually from the Windsor area. So it was nice to meet with him and his wife, because they know this area. They have relatives around Lambton County, so it was very nice talking to someone who was from home. So we had a really nice reception where they greeted us and welcomed us in the Vatican, in the Canadian Embassy Gardens. They had like lemon trees there and orange trees, olive trees. It was just very beautiful. And Paul and his wife were just finishing their term. The ambassador serves 4 years in Vatican City before they're moved on to another post. So that was a really nice place to meet one another. Next slide. Each day we were there, it was fully booked with tours and press conferences, but the traveling and the stress, it was very difficult on our elderly delegates. On the Monday and Wednesday, my mom didn't go out. She chose to rest on those days, because when we traveled to Rome, we had to drive to Toronto, then we had to catch a flight to Montreal, then we had barely enough time in Montreal to race across to the next gate to board another plane to Rome. And so we traveled straight on to Rome. And when we arrived at the airport, it was one of the biggest airports in the world. We had to catch a train to get our luggage, because it's so huge. They have trains in between the terminals. Then we had to walk. I had to help my mom and pull her in her walker, because we were catching a bus to our hotel, and the bus was parked like a kilometer away. So in all, we had like a good 20 hours of travel. So the delegates, they were just wiped right out. The trip was very triggering for the survivors. They had a lot of emotions to deal with. Some of the delegates lost their luggage, which was really upsetting, because they had their sacred items in their luggage. They did eventually get them 4 days after they arrived, so it was a stressful 4 days, because some of their sacred items had been in their families for generations. So they were, really concerned about that. Also that evening, we were just finishing up dinner. Dinner in Italy is a long process. It starts about 7:30 and it ends about 11 o'clock, because they start a course, they serve it, they wait till everyone's done, they do another course. So it's a long process. And while we were just near the end having our dessert course, we had a blackout. And it upset some of the elders, because they knew that there was a war brewing in Ukraine, and they were worried that there was going to be a war across Europe. So, you know, it was worrying, and we're like, no, everything's going to be fine. It's going to be okay. Unfortunately, with the technology now dependent upon hydro, no one could use the elevators, and all the doors, you had to have a key card to open the hotel room doors. So with no hydro, no one was able to open their doors. So we all had to stay in the restaurant and in the lounge for another couple hours when everyone was tired and getting cranky to wait for the electricity to come back on. So that was another challenge we had. And there were sunrise ceremonies, and there was mass every day to assist people with their spiritual needs. If we can go to the next slide. This is a picture of my mom holding a basket. The picture was taken at Hillside School. And we were going to have a gifting ceremony where we would all give the Pope a gift. And the delegates chose meaningful gifts that conveyed a message from their community. So my mom chose to gift the Pope a hand-woven black ash basket that was made by Faye George in our community. And making baskets was an art form that was almost lost because of residential schools, and it's being revitalized now. Faye and her nephew Spencer, they teach a lot of classes. They have a lot of people that they help make baskets, me included. I've learned to make baskets from them, so it's something that's being revitalized. My mom carried this basket, and inside it held the memories of the residential school, the memories and the trauma that the children carried, and she presented it to the Pope so that now it's his burden to carry, and now he can, in his steps in reconciliation, that's up to him how he's going to deal with that now. My mom attended the Mohawk Residential School, and throughout all this process, we were thinking about the survivors that never had the chance to tell their stories, and we kept them in our hearts and minds during the journey to the Vatican. There are a lot of survivors have passed and have never been able to share their stories, and they've had to carry that trauma. So we've really tried to honor them and think about them. This trip wouldn't have been possible without the support of our family and our community, the prayers and financial support from the Chippewas Kettle of Stony Point, the Anishinaabe Nation, the Assemblies of First Nations, and the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops. It took a lot of organizations to get together and plan this, and as you can imagine, it was very costly. Our next slide is a picture of Fred Kelly. He's standing before the delegates, and this was the night before they were meeting with the Pope. They had, I'll just start at the top here. The Assembly of First Nations and Canadian Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, they worked for months planning the logistics of transporting 150 people across the globe. The Canadian Embassy in the Vatican, they had to make arrangements with customs in both countries so that we could travel with our regalia and with our sacred medicines, because that's something that you normally just can't fly into another country with. So we had to have everything listed in advance that we were taking. Everything had to be listed, everything had to be registered so that it could be, taken across the border. So it was a lot of paperwork. We also had to deal with COVID precautions because we were in the middle of a pandemic. So everybody had to make sure they had their documentation for their COVID vaccines. We had to, if you traveled to the States during COVID, you had to use the Can Arrive app to come back into the country. We also had to use an app like that when we were in Italy. So we had to have the app ready to show that we had all our documentation, but also because they were still on a lockdown, we had to carry copies of our vaccine and our passport with us, because if you were stopped by the police or security and they asked you for your papers, you had to have it, your vaccine papers, or you would get sent to a deportation center for quarantine. And also, after 8 o'clock at night, you had to be in your room because there was still a COVID curfew. So we had all these different precautions we had to deal with. The delegates, the first and second delegation, we met for months on Zoom. First we met once a week, then we met twice a week for a couple hours each time. And for a lot of people that was new. A lot of people didn't know how to use Zoom, so getting everyone on it, getting everyone adjusted. You've got elders in their 80s who never use a computer, and they're on Zoom and they're like, "Can you see me? Can you hear me?" So that was something new for them, and so it was a chance for all the delegates to get to know each other and hear each other's voices. So they spent months planning their messages and what they were going to say to the Pope, because we were told we had 60 minutes with the Pope. So we were planning for months for and the expense to have 60 minutes with the Pope. So they practiced every week. So they would practice and we would say, "We're 2 minutes over. What are we going to take out?" So then they decide, what are they going to take out? So they finally got it down to 60 minutes, and they practiced right up until the night before. The next slide, please. So this is a picture of us leaving in the morning. We were getting ready to go see the Pope, my mom and my sister and I, and all the streets where we were one-way streets. So the bus was parked on the next block over, which was the street going the other direction. So we had to go down the street, but as you could tell from the picture, my mom was really nervous. It was a very stressful morning. And when we came when we came down to the lobby at the hotel, there was a group of people singing and drumming. And that was the best thing I ever heard. These were folks that came, they were mostly from BC. They flew to Italy at their own expense to be supportive and to build the emotional support in the survivors. And they really wanted to be there to sing their sacred songs. And that really made a big difference. That support was amazing, and I'll be forever grateful for that. Next slide. And this was just us arriving at the Vatican. We met in the Pope's private quarters. So we were in his library, and then he had a small room. It was quite busy. You could see Gerald at the front there. He was singing, and he had his drum, so that was nice. It was really amazing experience. If we go to the next page, this is a picture of my mom when she met the Pope. And he was very nice, just so welcoming. We had 60 minutes scheduled with the Pope, but the Pope really wanted to hear their stories, and they ended up visiting for a full 2 hours. So twice as long as they were scheduled, and everyone was able to give the Pope their gift, and he gave several gifts as well. I received a rosary blessed by the Pope, and my mom received a medallion. If we could go to the next page. It was really nice. They were inscribed with his personal coat of arms. Each Pope has their own coat of arms, and some popes have coat of arms from their families. And his means having mercy, he called him, and that comes from an episode in the gospel where Christ picks a seemingly unworthy person to follow. So we were really touched by those gifts that the Pope gave us. Our next slide is a picture of our delegation, the survivors that met in the Pope's library with him. So that's a really nice picture. It just went so well. And when we left, the singers were there again, because we walked out to St. Peter's Square and we were singing and dancing out to the square, and it was very festive and very nice. And the next picture, that was a library where we were waiting also. And then the next picture is a picture of us leaving the Vatican. So that was just after the visit with the Pope, so it was really nice. And the next pages I'm not going to read, because these are the survivors' own words of what had happened to them, and some of the things they shared were their personal experiences of trauma and abuse, the lasting effects of the intergenerational trauma, the confusion that they have with identity, spirituality, and self-worth. Many of them still have these today, and not only them, but the future generations, like all the survivors and their families, they all feel this today. Many of the survivors left the school and had nowhere to go. A lot of the men joined the armed forces. And some of them were forced to join the armed forces, so that they could leave the residential school. They had to join the armed forces. So in doing that, they not only carried the trauma of the residential schools, they also suffered post-traumatic stress from their experiences in the military, but they were also enfranchised. So their legal identity as Indigenous was taken away, and many young men and women were forced to marry before they could leave also. One of the survivors we talked to, she was married for 69 years, but her husband was chosen by the clergy at the school, and able to leave the school, they were forced to marry, because they felt that's what they were to do as good Canadian citizens. In order to leave the school, they had to get married. So the other things that the survivors talked to the Pope about was the unmarked graves and the missing and murdered children. We really want to have transparency. We want to have the missing children identified. We want their remains identified. And that can only be done with complete transparency from the church. They have records of all the children that attended, and all those records are at the Vatican, and we want them returned to Canada, and we want to be able to examine them. So that's a part of reconciliation is transparency, and that's something that we want to have. Evidence of genocide that happens needs to be acknowledged. This trip was about truth-telling. We weren't trying to attack anybody. We weren't trying to, cause any trouble, but it was about the survivors telling their truths and having them heard. And that was important, and we wanted financial commitment from the federal government and from the churches to adequately cover the costs of finding the graves, of identifying them, and we want the investigative work to be done in a respectful, culturally sensitive way, including supports, wellness supports. Because when the first unmarked graves were found out west, a lot of things happened. There was a lot of anger. There were some churches burnt down, and that's sad, because we know that churches are the cornerstones of our community. They have our history of who got baptized, who got married. We don't want to see that happening, but because people were experienced traumatic crisis. That's how some people reacted, and that's what happens when trauma is not met with support. So that's why we need wellness supports, because it's so traumatic. And it wasn't just traumatic for the Indigenous, oh goodness, it wasn't just traumatic for the Indigenous community, it was traumatic for all of Canada. I sometimes work at Catholic schools in the area, and I've had many parents reach out to me, parents and students, who questioned their faith when this happened. Like, a lot of people left the Catholic Church because of it, because they questioned their faith. They couldn't believe that this happened in Canada. And so it needs to be, wellness needs to be inclusive for everybody, not just Indigenous people, but people in our whole society, because this is something that it's difficult, it's part of our history. We need to understand what happened, and we need to be able to deal with it. And we also would like public acknowledgement. If you go into government buildings and schools, the Government of Canada has an apology to residential survivors and their children. We would also like the same thing from the Catholic Church. We called upon the Holy Father to say "I'm sorry" directly to the survivors and their communities. And we were very fortunate that on the second day that we did meet with the Pope, he did apologize. And some people ask, you know, does it really matter? Does an apology matter? Like, an apology is just words. And it can be just words, but it does matter. For every survivor that has a 6-year-old child inside them that was traumatized and injured, they need to hear "I'm sorry." Sorry is a very powerful word. They needed to hear that, but they also need to see the actions of "I'm sorry." And the action of "I'm sorry" is reconciliation. So, you know, being sorry is just part of it, but going forward with reconciliation is the second part of it. And reconciliation happens on both sides, like having someone say they're sorry and us being able to accept it is another part. It's another part of our healing journey, because you can't fully heal unless you don't allow what hurt you to continue taking up space in your heart. So in able to let that go, you need to accept the sorry, and you need to be able to work together towards reconciliation. We also ask the Holy Father to support our initiatives towards the missing and murdered Indigenous women calls to action, the 94 calls to action for truth and reconciliation. So it's essential that concrete actions and changed behaviors are evident as we walk this healing path together as Canadians. I think I'm way behind. If we can go up to, say, page 25. Also, the National Chief spoke. She spoke on behalf of the little ones who came before us. So she spoke about how important it was that we help them, identify them, and help their spirits cross over in a good way. We also would like assistance with rebuilding our language, our spirits, our family, and our nations. She spoke on behalf of the people in the now. One of the things that was so important that the Pope, issue an apology is the Pope has incredible influence around the world. The Pope has influence with government, with social agencies. So in having the Pope's support, gives us a lot of support. So that's why it was so important that, you know, we talked to the Pope and we asked that you know, he support us in all these reconciliation efforts. And it's also important our chief spoke on those who are yet to come, that the church needs to be honest and take a global inventory of all their policies and processes related to colonization that exist today, and that they not only own up to their role in the creation of these, but develop a plan that supports reparation and reconciliation in a truly transformative way. Because many of the frameworks that support colonization are still in place today, and one of the main ones is the Indian Act. That is a piece of legislation that colonizes us. It determines our bloodlines. We're the only people that have a blood quantum placed upon them. The only other species that has a blood quantum are horses and dogs and native people. So that is like relegating us to animals. And we would like the blood quantum taken away. So we also had the youth speak. Many youth today, they struggle to speak their language because of these colonizing policies. We just really need a lot of support, and we ask that while 2022 was recognized as the International Decade of Indigenous Languages, so we're asking for support to revitalize our languages. There's so much, like there was so much in this trip. There were so many policies that we had to look at. There were so many things that the survivors wanted to share, like it could really fill a whole day. But I guess the one thing that the survivors spoke up on page 29 was that in spite of all the hurdles and barriers, and these are the survivors' own words, that were deliberately put in their way, they're still here. That our resilience in the face of all of this demonstrates that we are extraordinary and that we can be part of the transformation of Canada and the global community. And I'll give you one example, well, a couple examples is we are stewards of the land, we're tied to the land. Many of our people, they still live off the land, especially in the north. So when things happen, we notice. And when climate change is affecting our environment, it's the First Nations people who are affected first. It's not the politicians and millionaires on Bay Street or Wall Street. They're not going to notice the climate change, but it's going to be the people who live off the land, the people who gather eggs, the people who get their fish from the waters. So we're tied so closely, so we're always fighting against global warming and things that affect our environment. That's why we have water walkers who want to protect the water. And people are always saying, you know, those native people are always protesting about something. But we're protesting for the earth, for animals, for two-spirited people, for their rights, for people with accessibility challenges. There was a First Nations woman who took the Bank of Canada to court because she was blind, and she won her case. And because she won her case, every bank machine in Canada now has to have Braille on the keys so that people who are blind or can't see, hard of seeing, can use Braille. And that was because of an Indigenous woman who complained and took the bank to court. So the things we do may not always, seems like we're complaining, but it's for the betterment of all. On our next slide, we have a picture of our chief, Gerald Antone. So after we presented the Pope with gifts, he presented us with this gift to each organization, and it was a bronzed olive branch. And he issued his apology, and he said that he really felt a deep shame for what happened. And he gifted us this olive branch with a promise to return to Canada, which he did, and he came and apologized on our soil. So, you know, we're looking forward to what will happen next, the next part of reconciliation. So if we go to the next page, there's pictures of our celebration in the Vatican. We had our Inuit dancers with their traditional song and dance. Our Métis group, they were singing and jigging, and that was really nice. And then we had our Anishinaabe dancers who danced and sang. And that was the first time ever something like that was done in the Vatican. And it was like, in the past, would have considered to be like quite heathen activities, but really it's just our Indigenous celebration. The next page is a picture of my sister and myself holding up our community flag where the Pope was sitting. So that was nice. And our next slide is just a reminder that this wasn't about retaliation, like we're not against the Catholic Church or anything like that. Many of our survivors, they are still Catholic. They still believe in their spirituality. They're confused Catholics because they don't understand everything that's happened, but they're still Catholic. So this wasn't about retaliation, it was about truth-telling. An apology does not erase what happened, but it's an acknowledgement of responsibility and a commitment of doing things differently going forward. And we want a future where there's justice and peaceful existence, which is foundational for our treaties, because we have treaties that we want honored. So we want to move forward from just an apology to reconciliation. There's so much work to do. And if you look at the next page, in 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission announced the 94 calls to action. And there's a website that was created by CBC Canada, and it monitors reconciliation efforts across Canada. And they do a lot of research. They do research and interviews with survivors, stakeholders, and all levels of government. This website is continually updated, and it tracks the progress of each of the 94 calls to action. So since 2015, you can see right on the end, only 13 calls to action have been officially completed out of 94. So if we were to graph that to try to estimate how long it would take to have all 94 calls to action, conservatively, it would take at least 46 years. So it's going to take 5 decades to implement all the 94 calls to action. So that shows you that this process is going to take a long time. It's a lot of hard work. I hope in my lifetime to see all 94 calls to action implemented, but it's going to be a long ways to go, and it's a lot of hard work. Just before I play the last video, I'm going to read my mom's paper that she wrote. It says, "Hello, my name is Marlene Cloud. I was a prisoner at the Mohawk Residential School for 7 years. I felt like I was a prisoner. It might have looked nice and safe from the outside, but inside its walls there were evil spirits hiding, and they were there to take our spirits away. In 1949, Edna, Betty, Adge, and myself went to residential school. We were taken by the Indian agent. We left our beautiful, happy home. We were children and did not realize what was happening or why. We entered the twilight zone, an environment where there was no love, no one to care about us, no safe place, and no security. Some of the children died there. My sister Edna got sick there at the residential school and was sent home, and she died. We went home for the funeral. When we were admitted to the school, we were given a small bundle of clothes and we were told to make them last for 1 week. Then we would exchange them for different ones. We were given a physical exam, and they tested us for eye diseases and venereal diseases, even though we were only children. And I think one thing I'd like to add on here is at the residential schools, several of the children, they practiced medical tests on them, medical procedures and medical drugs. Many women were sterilized without their consent or knowledge. After receiving a clean physical, they were admitted into the school. Any of their personal belongings or their clothes was taken away from them. They were only allowed to have what the school gave them. And more importantly, they were given numbers. My mom was number 11, and that's how she was referred to for the next 7 years of her life. Our clothes, our beds, our shoes, anything that was ours had our number on it. Put yourself in our place. Would you like to be called by a number? We were locked in the basement of this big mansion-looking building. We were kept in a playroom, but there were no toys. We created our own games. We would make a ball out of old socks and play games and play tag. The second floor was reserved for the officers. It was a little better when we were taken to the classrooms, the dining hall, and the kitchen. They were all located in the basement. The attic was the dormitory. We slept in bunk beds and we were locked in at night. At first there were bars on the window and a big steel door. Later that door was replaced with a regular door. The government was happy because it just meant that they had more people, more Indian children to train and to assimilate. We became wards of the school. Residential schools became a vehicle for assimilating natives through the eradication of their language, culture, and spiritual beliefs. The school's mission was to civilize the natives and Christianize them. We are not heathen Indians. We are smart, proud, and intelligent people. For many years, I was unable to eat rice. It reminded me of the maggots that was in our food. We lived in terrible conditions that we were forced to endure. The officers carried straps and used them whenever they felt like hitting us. The children did all the work. They were given the responsibilities to carry out each day. At the age of 7, I had to sweep out the entire dormitory every day. Each year there were different responsibilities. At the age of 11, I was to work on a machine cutting bread. As a result, part of my fingers were cut off. This was a very traumatic time for me, and it took a long time to heal. As a result, I was labeled a freak, and other children did not want me to play with them. I used to have this saying that I would say to myself all the time to keep me going, and this is what I would say. I'm a lean dog, a mean dog, a wild dog alone, a rough dog, a tough dog, hunting on my own. Not for me the fireside, the well-filled plate, but sharp stone, sharp stick, cuff, kick, and hate. When I left the school, I believed that I must be an animal like the animals in a national park and reserves because we were kept in these schools. We were unable to leave. There was a fence all around and bars on the windows. We were locked in basements and locked in dormitories at night. We were prisoners. But the government failed. We are still here. We escaped, we came home, and we sued them for what they did. That case is called Cloud versus Canada. My mom and her fellow survivors launched a lawsuit, and it took them decades of work to reach certification. They filed a class action suit to sue the government, and when the lawsuit was certified as a class, because you have to prove it, you have to go through, file all types of motions and evidence and go to hearings to even be allowed to have a class action suit. So once it was determined that yes, we're going to certify this, you have enough evidence to file a case, that's when the government of Canada said, okay, we're going to settle. And then they settled every other case across Canada. So the Cloud versus Canada suit was the precedent that started the reconciliation. My mom said I learned 3 things in residential school. I learned to get up every morning and do chores. I learned to read and write, and I learned to survive. I survived the residential schools. I would also like to thank Russell Rakes for helping us to win our case against the government and for using his own money to keep it in the courts when no one else would help us. It cost a lot of money to start a class action suit. They used their own money, they used fundraising, but it got to a point where they ran out of money. But Russell believed in this case. He believed that they needed justice. And without his wife's knowledge or anyone else's knowledge, he mortgaged his house to support the case. So without Russell and his beliefs, this case would have never went forward. So in closing, I'd like you not to forget about what was done to us when we were the children of residential schools. So if we could play the video on the last page. This is a video the Catholic Church had created from our visit.
Hello and welcome back to Rome. I'm standing on the street outside the hotel where the Indigenous delegates have been staying during this week. Today was the last closed-door meeting with Pope Francis before the delegates meet in a general audience tomorrow.
As delegates from the Assembly of First Nations, loved ones, and supporters gathered outside the hotel.
I'm here in Rome to participate in the visits of the Native peoples of Canada, who are meeting with Pope Francis to discuss the residential boarding school system, and this issue has impacted my own personal life, and so it's important for me to support the delegates. So I've been able to hear their stories and what has motivated them to be here. So it's a very historic, significant time for the Indigenous people of Canada and really the Indigenous people of North America.
The delegates were carrying precious and significant items with them to the meeting, including this very special gift for Pope Francis. Michelle Shenandoah was carrying an empty Tikinagan, a cradle board, its emptiness representing missing children from residential schools.
The Assembly of First Nations meeting has now ended. It was 2 hours long, a whole hour long
longer than was anticipated.
The delegates and their supporters are gathering in St. Peter's Square for a press conference to reflect on their experience.
Hello, everybody. Bonjour. It's so good to see you today. It's a very special today. In 1493, your ancestors went over to our homeland and landed on our shores. It took them a long time. Our people, where your people came to visit, we have come over too. It took us a long time, but it was a little bit quicker. Because we had a plane. So it's so honorable, so humbling to have your people here welcome us here. Very historic place. Has anybody been over at the Sistine Chapel? Yes. Way in the ceiling, you have two figures. And where they have the two fingers coming together, this is the day that was painted for. You have your people here pointing fingers at us, and you have our people pointing finger back there. It's a very special, divine moment for all of us. It is also a very special occasion because the Holy Father, the person that represents the Catholic Church in the whole world, invited us through the voices of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, invited us. This invitation was long overdue. However, it is today.
Just want to thank our Creator for giving us such a beautiful day. A beautiful day to honor our survivors, to honor our children, the unmarked graves. We give you thanks for being here to support us in this journey, beginning of a new horizon for us. We thank you, and I thank our team and my brothers and sisters, our family, for working together all these months to come up with the right messaging to our Holy Father. I give you thanks. Aye.
Danse, mai gan motor siga san maswati sikote. I just gave you my Cree name, Walking Wolf, from the Cree Nation. I spent 14 years of my life in 3 different residential schools. Tomorrow is my birthday, and the gift we received today, or I received today, is a good day that tomorrow will be the first day of reconciliation, not only with ourselves, with our families and communities, but with our neighbors, and indeed with all of Canada. So I'm very, very encouraged by the audience we had today, going forward into our relationship, a new relationship, a better relationship, that of peaceful coexistence. So thank you for the opportunity to share that with you. Hi.
If you were to ask me, am I optimistic leaving our discussion with the Holy Father? I am. But he's going to take today and this evening to reflect on what he heard from us. And he will come back tomorrow at this general audience. And I'm hoping that he will be more direct about his visit to Canada and about an apology. Not that he has to apologize here. Our preference is for the Holy Father to come to Canada, apologize on Canadian soil, and do it on one of our territories. That is our hope and wish, and we made that very clear to the Holy Father. And so we'll see what tomorrow brings. But today, a wonderful day, because during our discussion with him, we could hear the drums, we could hear our people singing, and it felt tremendous. Thank you so much.
We were part of the secondary delegation brought here to bring the spirit of our people here. And we actually shared some of our ancestral songs to help stand up the ones that actually went and met. So before they actually went into the meeting, we shared our songs with them to stand them up. And then when they came out, then we again sang the song welcoming them back. So the first thing that they heard, before they even seen us, they heard our songs. They heard our prayers, and they felt the strength of their people, because they were standing on behalf of all of us, right? And so we wanted to make sure that they had that strength to carry out that very, very important meeting. I wore my speeches, which is my regalia that was bestowed upon me from our elders, and that's so that I can have a strong mind while we're taking care of the work or the business, which was to actually sing the songs, to sing the appropriate songs, so that we could bring all of our minds together, so that we are strong, so that we can take care of this in the best way that we know how, the best way that we can.
How are you feeling now that they've come out of the meeting?
We feel good that now, it's just acknowledged. It's acknowledged, it's brought out, and it's brought out in a global forum, so that, now, everybody knows that, these things did happen. But, today we move forward. Today we move forward with that reconciliation piece.
Do you think Pope Francis heard you before the meeting?
Yes, he did.
Do you know what he said or how he felt?
We heard a little bit of what they shared, and he says that there's a lot of work that needs to happen, and the work needs to be mutual. So we have to meet each other.
The delegates returned to the hotel for another press conference where the significance of the cradleboard gift to Pope Francis was revealed. If Pope Francis returns it to the delegates, they know he has agreed to walk with them.
Of significant importance is the cradleboard. It is a symbol of every Indigenous child who went to residential school, and for those who survived, and more importantly, for those who did not return home. The Holy Father has now been tasked with the responsibility to care for this cradleboard overnight and to reflect on the messages delivered by our delegates. If he is truthful in his commitment to the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, then he will follow through with our request to return the cradleboard to our delegation at the general audience tomorrow. We stated to His Holiness, how you treat this cradleboard will demonstrate how you treat our people in the future. By returning the cradleboard to the delegation, he will demonstrate his commitment to our people. Much.
And I ask my dear friend, Archbishop Smith, is it possible for me to light my pipe in his presence? I know I don't need permission to do my own spirituality, but out of respect for the premises in which I'm in, I ask. If it's part of your invocation, yes. Here you see, gentlemen, what was cast asunder as ways of the devil, this born-again pagan, holding a pipe, a sacred pipe. And I go to the Pope, and I raise my pipe in the four directions, do my invocations, then I go to him and touch him on the head, touch him on the shoulder, touch him in the heart, whisper to him as I kiss him on the forehead, I love you. That is an honorable experience, to be able to tell another human being that you love that man. And then I sit back and listen with pipe in hand as these beautiful people tell their stories of the themes that they want to present to His Holiness, and he's listened carefully, attentively. I know he's got sciatica. I know he's getting frail in his old age. And I know what that's like. But here he is, the head of the church, who was anointed to succeed. The anointment of Jesus Christ that I read about as a child, being a holy person, telling him, upon this rock I will build my church. That is an honor.
Before we leave tonight, we'll take you into the room where the delegates will be meeting Pope Francis in that special audience tomorrow. Here's a photo that was taken earlier today. That's all for now, so please join us tomorrow for the last day of coverage from this very special week of meetings. You can get all the latest at slmedia.org. Thank you.
Extremely proud I am of all the elders that traveled. They made this journey. They worked through their own trauma, and they had the strength and resilience to do this journey of a lifetime, because it really was a historical journey of a lifetime, and I'm so proud of my mom that she did this. And I would just like to thank you for having us here today. God bless.
Thank you very much, Joanna and Marlene. It has been a pleasure for us to have you, and you have shared your precious story of history and language and way of life, and you've given us all a lot of knowledge today to carry with you, and we really, really enjoyed having you here today, so thank you so much. We're going to close with a meditative prayer and then our usual closing song. So this prayer is more of a meditation, and is taken from the United Church website. So these are not all my words; they are written there if you want to access the whole thing. So let's take a deep breath. Creator, God, we are joyous that we have been able to gather as community. You have asked us to support, nurture, teach, and to treat every child as we would want to be treated, to love every person as you have loved us. These are the ways of our ancestors. We are grateful that you have taught us to work toward building a better world where all creation thrives and where every child matters. On this Orange Shirt Day, we remember the stolen childhood of all the children forcibly raised by church-run institutions known as residential schools. We lament and are sad at how these institutions stole from children the opportunity to grow in safe and loving environments, and stole from elders the opportunity to share their teachings and wisdom with younger generations, and stole from communities the opportunity to live intergenerationally. We mourn the children who never returned home. We are sad for the communities that were destroyed, the hearts that were broken, the stories never shared, and the relationships shattered. We ask for your comfort to all who are seeking healing and who daily wrestle with the ongoing harmful legacy of these colonial institutions. Remind us to keep love in our hearts and always welcome and care for children and families. As we pray for healing so that we who live together in this country and in this community can also work together to build a better future where all children are cherished, beloved, and given what they need to thrive, and where right relationships are built. May it be so, Creator, God, grant these things. Miigwech and Amen. If you'd like to stand for our closing song, and this will give you a chance to stretch a wee tiny bit. Miigwech, everyone. Come and join us for a cup of coffee if you wish. Have a good week.